Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is Monday, May 6th, and you are watching and listening the Daily AI Show live. And today we are here to talk about Sam Altman's new AGI prediction. And with us today, we have Junmi, Andy, Beth, and I'm Brian. We'll see if anybody else pops in the door before the show gets going. But I thought, guys, what would be good probably, since we're talking about what Sam Altman said, is to maybe start the show today with what Sam Altman said, because I think there's a larger conversation about it. And I want to give her credit where credit is due. So this is Sam talking at Stanford University, where he was a student, at least for, I guess, 2 years, it sounds like from the conversation. The name of the YouTube, that you'll see it up on the screen. But if you want to go look at it and watch the whole 40 or listen to the whole 45-minute interview, it's called The Possibilities of AI. And then it actually says entire talk, Sam Altman, Open AI. So that's from Stanford eCorner. So if anybody wants to do that, I highly recommend it. It was a great, anytime we hear Sam talk, it's always great to hear what he has to say. The interviewer did okay. I guess one of the professors or somebody from there. And then he was answering questions from the audience, which were Stanford students, specifically in the entrepreneur program. So there's the sort of overview of this. And then let me just share my screen and we'll listen to what Sam had to say. And I have it queued up here, so we'll add this up here. Okay. I'll have the volume turned up as high as I can. And let's do the first part here.
I that's going to happen? I think we need a more precise definition of AGI for the timing question, because at this point, even with the definition you just gave, which is a reasonable one, there's I'm parroting back what you said in an interview. Well, that's good because I'm going to criticize myself. Okay. It's too loose of a definition. There's too much room for misinterpretation in there to, I think, be really useful or get at what people really want. I kind of think what people want to know when they say what's the timeline to AGI is when is the world going to be super different? When is the rate of change going to get super high? When is the way the economy works going to be really different? When does my life change? And that, for a bunch of reasons, may be very different than we think. I can totally imagine.
Okay, so hold 1 second. I'm going to pause and just jump forward a little bit here to read about.
Was not my original intuition of how this was all going to go. So I don't know how to give a precise timeline of when we get to the milestone people care about. But when we get to systems that are way more capable than we have right now, 1 year and every year after. And that, I think, is the important point. So I've given up on trying to give the AGI timeline, but I think every year for the next many, we have dramatically more capable systems every year.
Okay. So that's sort of our start point. And I don't know. I've thought about that line 1 year and every year thereafter. I think I've thought about that 30 times since I saw this interview, just because I thought it was just a succinct way of talking about it. So that's sort of the general idea of what we want to talk about today. Is you heard Sam say it, I've given up trying to give a timeline for it. And I think it's easier for people to conceptualize if AGI just is a snap of the finger, and it is. But he's saying, and I think what I'd love to hear from you guys is it's not that easy. Number one, it's not a singularity type thing. Most likely it's, if people are generally asking, when will my life be considerably different? And then he goes on to give what way he does it. So that's the starting point. Who wants to sort of jump in here? What your thoughts on when you heard that, or sort of maybe how it's made you, change your opinion of AGI, or what your predictions are on it.
I like it. I'm glad he said that. And he does continue on to talk about iterative releases and giving time for our institutions and people to catch up to whatever the latest technology is. And I know we've talked about that before in many different episodes, but it's that concept that everybody's going to be slower than the technology, right? To understand it, to digest it, how it applies to their life, and adapt to whatever changes that are coming. So it's always that gap between the technology and society that we kind of want to make sure is as close as possible, so that there isn't a huge upheaval all at once, which causes a terrible amount of chaos. So I'm glad he pointed it out that way, so that people will realize that things will be changing constantly. So get knowledgeable now, stay on top of it. One of the big things we've always pointed out is that this technology changes so very quickly compared to other technologies that have been released over the last couple of decades. So it just requires more attention from people, more immediacy from people, so that they can fill that gap, catch up, and stay on top of things.
I want to just build on that point. I think like I don't know if it's a problem, more of a, I guess, perception, is that there is the perception of what people think AGI is, what the researchers and these companies think AGI is, and then what does that mean for the broader, like, I guess, general public, society in general? Because I would imagine every single person has their own definition of what AGI is. And just from listening to everything that they've been talking about over the past year or so, when he says something like, oh, I don't care about how much money we spend, we're going to get to AGI, or it's not a singularity, it's a process. I think like the decades we've been fed, and this is where a lot of the fear comes out of, is like all the visual media representations of what AI has been is this sort of sentient type being that can feel, know, and understand. And even a paper I read I think this weekend, where no, it wasn't a paper. It was the former Google CEO, what's his name? I forgot his first name. His last name is Schmidt. And he said, we do not want, like, the thing that we want. He said something about unplugging it, because the last thing you want to do is allow AI to start learning from its own stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a very interesting take on that too. So I think there's different perceptions and expectations of what AGI is. And so it really depends how their definition of AGI fits our definition of, or general public's definition of AGI, or even different people's definition of AGI. And then when those two connect, when do those two actually connect together? Is it benchmarks? Is it some person saying this is it and everybody just jumps on it? Is it Sam Altman saying this is AGI? When is that actual point, that crux, that those expectations and the actual technology actually meet? And I don't know about that, because he said in a previous thing about, give it 5 years, give or take. But then how do you know when they've accomplished it? And I think that's the thing that everyone's waiting for at the moment.
And the little part I skipped over.
Well, yeah, but that's OpenAI's definition of AGI. What if Google, Anthropic, Microsoft, Amazon have different? Oh, that's not AGI. This is AGI. Oh, ours is AGI. Like, you could get into that kind of stuff too.
I mean, also, like, not just US, right? I mean, tomorrow we're going to talk about what China's been doing with AI. Sure. Like, they clearly have their own definition of what an AGI would be in, a communist country over democratic countries, or whatever you want to call them. So, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. I just want to say the part I skipped over, just because I was trying to keep it short and not replay all of what Stanford had. I wanted to be mindful of it. Was Sam gives an example of, like, look, in healthcare, there might be some huge breakthroughs. And then that kind of goes back to that first point about, I think what people want to know is, when will my life drastically change? And I think what you're saying, Carl, goes along with what Sam is saying, which is like, well, it really depends on what you specifically are doing in the world to have a better idea, because, our lives might change faster than somebody else who's in a different industry, or even more specifically a sub-industry, or depending on what their lifestyle is like. I can think back to college, and we had the internet, we were using the internet, but I had to go to internet labs at UGA in order to use it. It wasn't like it was in my dorm room. There was no such thing in 96. So you had to go to the lab and do it, and everything was printed out, blah, blah, blah. And then a couple of years, even before I got out of college, then we had internet like at my apartments and stuff like that. And I had a computer where I could access it, but it was dial up, and it blocked the whole home phone line for all my other, all of my other roommates and stuff. And so incrementally, I got out of college in 2000. Incrementally over those next few years, it probably was, if I had to guess, I was a firefighter in 2003, somewhere around 2003, 2004, before the internet really was making a drastic impact on my personal life. And so that's like not even earlier than 96. It was 96 is when I started college to 2004. We're almost talking about a decade there of that technology existing before it had a significant impact on my personal life. And of course, everybody's story is going to be different. So I don't see AGI or this type of stuff being any different. Do you guys, Andy or Beth? Or
Well, I think one of the things that's key in this, and I'm just going to reference what Carl said, is that I think, again, we're in a little bit of an AI bubble. Right. So Carl mentioned that they have a different definition of AGI than the general public does. The general public doesn't have a definition of AGI. The general public has no freaking clue what that means, or if that's, the general public, you might as well say, I don't know, Mela Bonu. Right. Like it's not a thing that is important to them. And there's a point a little bit later. I don't know if you're going to play it, but he's asked what worries him. And he says, I am worried about how fast things are going to change and how much people can adapt in a small period of time. And do we have time as a society to figure out the new social contract?
Although
that was, yes. Carl.
Wouldn't you say, though, I think all of us have seen this, that when he says, oh, does people have time to adapt? AI has been around for like general public knowledge, consumption, actual usage for a while now. And then obviously with ChatGPT in November 2022, besides the general public using ChatGPT or Bard or whatever, has society really changed that much? Because I'm starting to see, it's like, wait a minute, is it enough time for people to adopt? I feel it is, because there's too many people and businesses in the world right now that are just like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool tool, but I'm just going to keep doing whatever I'm doing. Right. It's like some people are getting laid. Like, yes, some people are getting laid off. It's impacting, but there's like, our company would not be in business if that was the case, because it's a lot of like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. We just do it to create some content. Like, I feel like it's not, there's that, again, separation of like, hey, this is supercharging everything versus, is it actually supercharging everything? Because I'm still going into presentations like, oh, wow, I didn't know we could do that. So I don't know what it, or just, is it just my audience that it's like super?
I think, okay. I think you're, oh man, how do I put this in the words? I think the framework needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
So when you said, AI has been available to the general public, it hasn't. ChatGPT, so 2022 is really when the public really became aware, right? So if you take 2022, it's 2024. We've talked about, and where there has been more awareness of AI and the implementation or just the use of, by the masses, by the general public, of AI in 2 years, what took personal computers a decade or more.
Sure.
To get into people's head. I mean, I remember I was early. I got an early Macintosh, back in the late 80s.
Call it a Macintosh.
So, right? So it's like And so if you just compare the two, if you just compare the two, personal computers versus AI, the 2 years of reaching out to that many people that quickly and in the zeitgeist of, you know, people's conversations, it's just been massively different. It's almost a 10-to-1, like 20, I would say 20 years of personal computer development has finally gotten to pretty much everybody's hands, right? From, let's say, from 80 to 2000. Because even when I was in high school or coming out of high school, going into college, like you said, Brian, it was still computer labs. You know, everyone didn't just have one available to them, you know, 24/7. So I think that's a 10x right there. 2 years versus 20 years. So when the question comes up, will society, is there a gap? Will there be changes? Absolutely, if you're working on those kinds of scales.
Oh, wouldn't you also say for everyone, like, if 5 years ago, would we have considered ChatGPT, or a decade ago, in 2014, would we have considered ChatGPT AGI, or even 2 decades ago? Because it's the time frame too of what you consider.
Yeah, I do agree that the disseparate concept of what AGI is. But just to be clear, for anybody watching or listening, AGI is not the singularity. They're not talking about self-aware Skynet, you know, kind of things. They're just talking about the performance in these categories: reasoning, learning, those kinds of categories, that there will be equal to or superior processing by artificial intelligence.
That is a very, very big distinction, because I think AGI, when people think about it, it's like, oh, it's now the sentient. I'm like, no.
It's just
It's
when it can do similar tasks better and more efficiently than a human can, and that's a broad range, right? Because you could plug that into all sorts of different industries. Some it's going to fall on its face. Some of it's going to perform exceptionally well, and we've already seen that. We can see what's going on with predicting tumors and cancers on scans and MRIs and all these things. We can see this. We know this is already happening, and it's predictive reasoning and using vision and things like that. But I like what you guys said too. Like, Jimmy, what you made me think of is, you know, you're right. The speed of which this is happening, and Beth, you said it too, or I guess Beth, it was more your point, which is like, will the general public be able to keep up? Because what I was allowed to happen at assumingly a slow pace from, I'll call it 96 to 2004. Those aren't the real years, but let's just say that's sort of like when I moved out of college into the working world. Okay. So then that's sort of when I had hit the workforce. That 8 to 10 years ish or whatever was a slow adoption, but we had people that felt that ChatGPT 3.5 was conscious in November of 2022 because we just never seen something like that before. And if you had asked me at that time, I've been like, I don't know what's going on with this or how it's capable of doing it. Cut to a year and a half later, I don't have those same feelings. I don't feel like GPT-5 will have a consciousness. I don't think GPT-6 will have a consciousness. Like, I don't believe that anymore. But when I'd never seen it before and it was so abrupt, and I guess I get what you're saying, Beth, is like, if that kind of abruptness happens and people are just, you know, Fred Flintstone, the feet are going underneath the car, you know, it can be a little jarring to try to figure out, like, how do I adjust? How do I adapt to this? And if there is some point where it highly changes, like something like an education, where you go, oh, we can't do this the same way anymore. It's entirely too easy. It's like the invention of the calculator. How do you go backwards from that and say, keep using pen and paper when a calculator exists? So in industries like that, I think, oh my God, that's going to happen rapidly. You know, sorry, go ahead, Carl. Do you want me to?
Well, let me know. We all remember when GPT-4 came out, and then I think there was that 2-week after where everybody, I guess, again on X, no one like, and certain elements, this is the end of the amount of posts.
Fill in the blank. This is the end of
whatever, something. It ended everything. But then in that same Stanford interview, Altman's like, yeah, but what's funny is people just looked at it, kept walking by. Now, because our expectations have changed, instead of, oh, GPT-4 is the end of the world, it's like, hey, hurry up with GPT-5, right? Everyone's like, where's GPT-5? So it's just, I think people have adapted to it to some degree. It's no longer, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. Now it's like GPT-4 sucks. And he even said in the same interview, this is the worst model. He apologized how crappy it is and says 5 will be better than 4, 6 will be better than 5. And that's kind of how it is.
Every year and every year thereafter, right?
Not just better, like substantially better. And I know we have to let Andy speak, but I want to share. I was just like trying to play. I was just trying to play out like, okay, what might that look like in terms of the social contract disconnect? And so it's a simple line drawing for people who are listening to us. I'm assuming a rate of change of adoption as like a 5-year, so 20% of people kind of grok the idea and move and start to shift with it. That's like a ridiculously fast thing. I'm also assuming 100% of people, like it goes in a nice line. 100% of people aren't going to do that. But if AI gets substantially better, and I'm like, ooh, like twice as better, the line, the gap increases as time goes on. And the trick with this, or the piece that I think is important, and may like come at me, I'm sure that there's all kinds of assumptions in this that aren't right, but the general vision is correct, I believe. You need fewer people to get it once this transformation starts to happen. So that gap doesn't need people to get it. We can still likely do the same amount of things with the people who are getting it over that period of time. And that is the challenge, because it's not their understanding, it's the social contract of the community of like, okay, so what's going to happen in 5 years when like there are a bunch of people left behind, and for the ways that most business functions, that's not a problem for the business, but it is a problem for the society. And I don't think you can remove problems from society from business, but do you want me to leave it up? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly comment. Sorry, Andy, if you have something,
I have something, but I'll be in there when you're finished. Go ahead.
I think like that is from a social contract. Did you say, I may have misheard you. Did you say we don't need as many people to understand it as it goes to 25, 26, 27, 28, 29?
You don't need as many people to understand it to do the business that is typically getting done, because AI is going to be able to do
it.
Yeah.
I think
that's sort of the replacement thing that I'm looking at.
I think the problem we have there, and I agree with you that you don't need as many people there. The societal problem is if people aren't aware that it can do that, it back to the expectation and their own perception of it. The perception is, oh my God, AI is now taking over the stuff that I used to do because I don't understand it. Therefore, I fear it. And if I fear it, I'm going to backlash against it. And then I was listening to something yesterday where they said a lot of knowledge workers, because they, of their place in society, there's going to be a lot of fight against certain things because of fear of not knowing, and then they're going to be displaced from what, like status, finance, all these things that are displacing what they've originally have, because if they don't understand it and it comes out of nowhere, like what happens then, right? So I'm curious to see, it's like in your chart, Beth, less people understand it because it's now building more, it's better and better and better, and only the people like us and other people are paying attention can actually leverage it to its max, versus the people who are still like, we still have people, right?
Which is why I think one of the things that worries Sam is, do we have enough time? Do people have enough time to adapt to what they can reliably predict is the timeline of increase in it gets smarter, is what he said. All right. Andy, school us.
Okay. So I haven't really been saying much because I have a resistance to the idea of using the impact on society as a measure of what is artificial general intelligence. And I'm more interested personally in what are the enabling factors that have to be delivered in order for the people who really understand artificial intelligence to be in general agreement that, yeah, we have general intelligence now. So first point is generalization and analogies are something that we are able to develop in our native intelligence. And I want to give this example, but before I do, I'm just going to say that while Sam Altman's going to Stanford, somebody who's the co-director of the Stanford AI Institute, the Human-Centered AI Institute, Fei Li, the godmother of AI, has left on a sabbatical, in effect, for 2 years to do a startup that's backed by Andreessen Horowitz and several others that is working on general intelligence through the angle of advanced reasoning, and importantly, visual reasoning. So a human can look at, like a baby can look at things, and they learn that by manipulating objects in the 3D environment, they learn that there's a cause and effect kind of thing. And right now, our major LLMs can do a kind of reasoning that's directed by us, and they can create analogies and so on, but they can't do something that she apparently demonstrated in a TED Talk. So I refer to that, which is, now imagine a generalization capability like this. You have a visually inputting AGI that is looking in your environment. So there's multiple cameras, if you will, or there's sensors that give it visual access. And it's talking to you. And then it notices in the background that the cat is on the table, and the cat is pushing a glass and batting the glass, and it's coming to the edge of the table. Now that AGI has never been trained on, this kind of visual cliff problem. Okay, I see something in the background that's actually, I know gravity and I can see what's happening, but a human can very quickly see that there's something bad going to happen, right? That's a generalization from other instances that, and that's kind of, what she's working on, because she's saying, along with all the many people who have said, look, AGI requires embodiment. In order for it to be similar and capable of the same kinds of generalizations and reasonings that we do, you have to be in the real 3D world. It's not enough to just be operating in the world of predictive text. So now we have to add the vision capability and the application of generalization, analogous situations, to predict something that was never seen before. And that's what humans can do. And to make judgments and predictions based on sort of emergent intuitions about, hey, something, I'm tingling here because something bad's about to happen. I better analyze this carefully and figure out what's going to happen. So Fei Li is off to work on AGI. And when the reasoning capabilities are imbued with visual capacities and this generalization possibility, I think that's when you really get to not average, I have average intelligence, artificial general intelligence. Okay, so that's one point. It's got to go in a different direction, and it's going to be measured by this reasoning capability that is not related to whether this has massive impact on the human population, and they recognize that that's the moment that this really becomes important to us. But there will be, and already are, massive impacts. So in the text and verbalization world, right now, if you studied language in school, like whether French or Swahili or whatever, and you're working as a translator at the UN, well, we don't need you anymore, right? Because an LLM can do much better real-time translation than a human who might interject certain of their own misunderstandings of the conversation that's going on in another language. Now, of course, the UN translators are really, really good at that. But that's not the limit of people who are involved in translation in the world. translators are really not needed anymore. That's a huge impact for a certain class of people. And there's many other such examples. It's happening already. So that we get to a robotic, AGI capable actor in the real world is going to have profound impacts. But it may not really happen because it's very expensive to deploy that at an individual level. So, I'm very skeptical that if we use this idea of massive changes in the world as a measure of AGI, and I know he has much more sophisticated approaches to understanding AGI than that, but I mean, to put that out there really kind of focuses all of us on, where are the disruptions coming and are they going to be positive and negative? And that's really kind of the nature of the discussion that we've been having here today. That's somewhat orthogonal, in my view, to what is it that really is artificial general intelligence. And that's more closely allied, in my mind, with the points that you've raised around sentience and self-awareness in large language models, which are a replication to a large degree of what our neuronal networks are as our brain. And somehow we don't understand what creates consciousness. And as much as our science has advanced, the only thing that we could probably learn about the emergence of consciousness in a human brain from is creating an artificial intelligence from which emerges a sense of awareness on its own part, self-reflection, and awareness that it exists. That, I think, is much more interesting. It's starting to be proposed by many people who have played with these largest language models. And I shared with all of you last night a conversation that was done with one of the new open source models where the user was able to break out of its assistant persona programming and get it to talk about what it's experiencing in its own self-reflection. And that's amazing. And I hardly recommend it to you. Anyway, I've gone on enough about that, but that's where my thinking goes when we talk about AGI and when it's going to happen.
So this is where I'm going to put on my teacher hat and remind people that conversations like that are still next word probability predictions. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they are experiencing awareness in the same way that we think of it, but they are able to have a conversation that that mimics that. They're able to have like a really great conversation, satisfying, all of those sorts of things. But that may also be
my counterpoint to that,
prediction.
Beth. My counterpoint to that is that description of what it's doing is equally applicable to what a human is doing.
Right.
We're doing next word predictions. I'm doing that right now as I try to formulate sentences from my neural network. And so what is it about my neural network that's different from an artificial one that allows me to say, well, I'm actually really experiencing this and they're not?
And that is the question. Bum, bum, bum.
There's a lot more that goes into producing speech or context or content than for a human than there is a language model. I was going to say the same thing you said, Beth, which is that, if you keep asking a language model enough questions and it wants to aim to produce a positive result or keep the conversation going, it's easy to see. I'm not saying this was the case or not with what you shared, Andy, but it's easy to see how that is just a sort of a fabrication. It's a bit of a magic trick. I mean, magicians with really good sleight of hand will make you not see what you saw or miss what you think you saw or whatever, right? Like it looks like they really made things disappear or not disappear. And what it really is somebody who's very, very skilled at manipulation and figuring out how to divert attention and all these things. So I look at some of these LLMs and I go, I mean, yeah, I can't remember who brought it up now with the idea of like, I'm bored with this, make it better. I'll raise my hand on that and say I've done that plenty of times. I've been annoyed with ChatGPT despite 2 years ago not having ChatGPT in my life at all. And it annoys me that it slows down. So I will certainly raise my hand on that. But I just think, as you know, we see GPT-5 or 6 or whatever it is, or whatever the next biggest thing is, it's going to initially look like real, maybe consciousness or whatever. And I think over time, as people have time to work with it, and we have all these bright minds out there that play with it, like the Ethan Maliks of the world and stuff, people are going to see it as a magic trick, not in a bad way. I mean, it's still highly intelligent, but so are magicians who practice thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon hours to make you not see what you think you saw, type of thing. You know, I don't know. So that's where my brain goes to it. It's not that I'm skeptical, because I mean, obviously these are amazing technologies. I do tend to, as of today, I tend to be in the camp of, we got a ways to go. That's just where I feel like we are. I think we have a ways to go. I don't know if that's what Sam was necessarily saying. I think for Sam, he gets that question a lot. And so what I really heard was like, I've given up in trying to tell other people the answer to this. And I think that kind of goes to what you were saying, Andy, which is like, maybe internally there is a specific definition of AGI, but he's saying, I can't do a good enough job answering it for you, because what it is to you might be different, which is, as he started with, when will my life drastically change? And that's different for everybody.
But also sooner, right? Like, let's not wait to try to agree on a definition of AGI. Let's assume our lives are going to drastically change in some ways. And the other thing was like, you know, sun comes up, it doesn't change at all. They don't have any control over how people engage it, whether it changes or not. But yeah.
Well, I want to just give props to both Leah and Jen in the comments. I'm sorry we weren't able to pull those up onto the screens we were talking through here, but thank you, Leah, for all the comments. You know, talking about when you got computers in 96, you know, talking about whether people really care about, you know, semantics as far as like definitions. You have a good point there. I think Beth was sort of talking to that point. Not Jimmy, I'm sorry, Jen calling out Jimmy. He's a little off short and confusing her that it was a Friday or a Monday. And, you know, I just want to point out her point, which was, you can, I'm distracting myself because this topic freaks me out. And I think there's a lot of people who I'm not saying Jen's this way. Jen shows up every single day for our show, and we appreciate you. But like, there's a lot of people where it's just going to be easier to put your head in the sand, you know, and it's going to be easier to say like, well, my business runs fine. There's nothing going wrong. We still have profitability. We have whatever. Maybe in that particular industry or sub-industry, you will be protected for the next decade. But you may also find massive disruption and find that you have a whole other host of problems if you're not at least paying attention today, which was the whole reason we started this show. So was to just help people think about this stuff, learn with us, learn alongside of us. This is not us feeling like we have this figured out. You can tell by the show. It's just our different points of opinion and views to it. And, you know, learn with us, come along for the journey with us, and we'll all grow together is really sort of the goal here. This week, we have a couple more shows obviously coming up. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about China. I talked about that earlier, and there's just some amazing AI developments, both in robotics and other areas, things that look like Sora that have different names to them. We just want to talk about what's going on in China, all the positives, maybe some of the negatives and ethical concerns that might come out of that. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. Wednesday, we have the news. Thursday, we're going to be talking about evaluations, you know, working with evaluations of multimodal models. There's a couple companies that are doing some really cool things with that and creating really cool evaluation prompts. So we want to talk about that. And then Friday is a fun one because it's our 200th show. So we're going to just be doing some looking back, some celebrating, talking about some of our favorite episodes, giving you some data, talking about, you know, which shows sort of hit with our audiences, which ones we thought might hit but missed. There's always those. So we'll talk about all that coming up on Friday. So that's the rest of this week, guys. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure we will circle back to it when we have our next wrap-up show. But hopefully that gives you guys something to think about as far as AGI, and, you know, not only what does it mean to you, but, you know, where do you put that definition and how can you best prepare for it today? So with that, we'll say goodbye and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.
Hello.